Welcome to Sarah's Writing Spot. I'm Sarah, and today we're going to talk about 9 awesome tips that you can use for writing an essay with 4th and 5th graders. So let's get started. So before we get started, I wanted to talk about the 2 different types of essays that are usually found in elementary school. And I'll be talking about both of those in this video. So in most cases, you have the 5-paragraph essay, and in the other case, you have narrative writing. Both are very different. The first 5 tips will have to do with all types of writing. My last few tips will have to do with just specifically narrative writing. So step 1, don't skip pre-writing. Pre-writing is so important. If we skip this part, then our essays will not look the way that they should. Now, like I said before, I mentioned that there's 2 different types of writing. You've got a 5-paragraph essay and a narrative essay. The organizer is going to look different between these 2. 5-paragraph essays are similar to the one on the left. In this case, this is a bubble graph for a persuasive essay. There are other organizers you can use too that section it off into specific sections. But the narrative organizer is going to look much different. Most narrative organizers have a place for characters, setting, beginning, middle, and end, or problem solution. So do make sure that you're using the right graphic organizer, because it's really going to get complicated if you start off with the wrong plan. Step 2. Break your instruction into small chunks. So don't feel like you have to attack the essay in just 1 or 2 days. You're going to get better quality work if you break it into many days of much smaller lessons and piece them together. I'd say a typical essay should take about 2 weeks to write with your students, about 10 days. And you're embedding little mini lessons along the way and modeling along the way so that they can see how it's done. Here's an example of how I would do a 5-paragraph essay. So I might have a lesson where we are planning, use a graphic organizer to plan. And then when it's time to actually do the rough draft, this might be how I would break up instruction for just the rough draft. So one day we would only look at the introduction paragraph, and that lesson would involve looking at examples of a really good introduction. Then it would involve me modeling how to write an introduction. And then it would involve giving students a chance to write their own introduction. And that's all that I would do that day for that lesson. And then the next day, same thing for the first body paragraph. We would look at an example. Then I would model how to do it myself. And then I would give students a turn. And so we would go through in that process. It would take 5 days just to write the rough draft of a 5-paragraph essay. Now, the more you do this, the more skilled the kids get. You can sort of speed things up later in the year. But if you're going through this for the first time with your students, you really need to break it down into these small baby steps. Step 3, use an example before you start. Please, please, please don't ever jump into a writing piece without showing students an example. They need to see the end product first so they understand what they're working toward. And your examples are going to look different. So notice here, I've got a 5-paragraph essay on the left with 5 clear paragraphs, but a narrative on the right side. You'll see a narrative does not fit into 5 neat paragraphs. So you need to talk to students about how these 2 are different. And then you need to talk about the characteristics and qualities of each. All right, step 4, write with your students. Like I mentioned before, there should be lots of modeling anytime you're working with your students with writing. Notice here I have a picture of the computer. That's because usually I would project my writing and I would sit there and, for instance, if we're working on an introduction, I might be typing an introduction as an example. While I'm typing, I would be talking aloud about what I'm doing, what I'm thinking about. For instance, well, I know I need to start with a hook, so let me think of a sentence that would be a great sentence to hook and draw in the reader. Then I would write that hook. Then I would say out loud, well, I need to also mention the main idea of my essay, so let me think of a sentence that would go here. And while you're modeling, it's okay to struggle and get stumped. That happens to me all the time, but it shows students that that's part of the writing process. And you just got to keep thinking and brainstorming and work through it. You can even ask kids to help you with ideas. But that's important for them to see that even as an adult, as a teacher, you still struggle with writing too, and that's okay. Step 5, embrace revising. I love the revision process. This is the part that makes magic with your work. This is where you can go back and really spice it up, add fun words, add sounds, all of those things, and really make it wonderful. Be sure to have students share out loud some changes that they've made to their own work, because when you compliment them on those changes and make a big deal out of it, then other kids are going to want to make changes too. So you might say something like, I love how you changed great to incredible. That was such a better word there. It just made such a difference. Or your beginning is so much better when you started with a sound. Doesn't that sound great? And so you can also have students compliment each other. You could have one student stand up and share a change they made, and then have another student comment on how they thought that improved the piece. All right, my next few tips are specifically for narrative writing. I'm not going to lie, I think narrative writing it's a whole nother beast when it comes to 5-paragraph essays and narrative writing. Narrative writing does not have the structure that 5-paragraph writing has, and sometimes that can make it more complex and a little more challenging to teach. So I have some tips specifically for that type of writing. Okay, the first one is I usually don't jump into narrative story writing right away. I usually front load it with a lot of different lessons to familiarize students with the characteristics of a narrative. So not only do we look at lots and lots of examples of narrative writing, we analyze them. I also do a lesson specifically on feelings and dialogue. So any good story is going to have action, feelings, and dialogue. Most kids are always putting action in their story anyway. That's the storytelling part. But a lot of kids forget to add in feelings, and they forget to add in dialogue. And a lot of times they forget because they've never been taught. Nobody has shown them how to do that. So one lesson I love to do for feelings is the typical show, not tell lesson. So many of you have probably heard of that. So I love to do that lesson before we start writing. I also love to do 1 or 2 dialogue lessons and teach students how to use quotation marks, how to use the punctuation when characters are speaking, because it's complicated. There are a lot of rules with dialogue. So it gives students more confidence when they write their story. They have more confidence when they're writing because they know they're doing the dialogue punctuation correctly. I also teach them other words than said. That's a fun time to start brainstorming other words than he said, she said, coming up with synonyms for that. So then again, when they're writing their story, they can have that in their mind and make sure they're varying their word choice as they're writing. So step 7, brainstorm narrative seeds with small moments. Small moments are a key for narrative writing. And what I mean by a small moment is picking a small period of time, maybe 5 or 10-minute period of time, and that's the story you're writing about. It gives you the chance to zoom in on it and really flesh out all those feelings, all those speaking parts. So you're really getting a great descriptive feel for that moment. We are no longer in 4th and 5th grade, we're no longer writing about your whole week at the beach. That's just too long. It's going to get diluted and very generic. So what I tell my students, for example, is I might say, I don't want to hear your whole week at the beach. I want to hear about one thing that happened, maybe really one, something that made you really excited, or something that made you really angry, or something that was really surprising. Maybe you got stung by a jellyfish. That would be a great story. And that only took place over like a few minutes. So let's zoom in on that and let's hear about that. All right, so one way to help kids brainstorm some of those small moments is I like to use this graphic organizer I call Seed Ideas. And I have 9 different emotion headings on this organizer. And we just start brainstorming together. I model too. I model some of my own memories and experiences and model how I can just jot down ideas for things that have happened to me, and encourage students to do the same. And it's fun to have the students share too, and they can share with each other and gain ideas from each other. This Seed Idea Organizer is actually free on my Teachers Pay Teachers website. So if you hop on over there, you can get a free organizer to get you started. Okay, so let's see. Next one, step 8, that is Freewrite the rough draft. I do this differently than the 5-paragraph essay. For our 5-paragraph essay, we chunk it like I showed before. We'll do introduction one day, first body paragraph one day, and so on. I don't do that with narrative writing. With narrative writing, by the time we've gotten to the rough draft stage, we've seen lots of examples. We've talked about great elements in narrative writing. This time when we get to the rough draft, I tell them, pretend like you're sitting down next to your best friend and you can't wait to tell them this story that happened to you, and just start writing and tell them it's okay. It's not going to be perfect. We're going to be doing a lot of revising. So really, we just want to get out your story from beginning to end, and then later we'll go back and change anything that we need to. All right, step 9. Go back and zing it up. Yes, I'm talking about revising again, but this time I've got a list of things that you can revise for. So with narrative writing, I love to spend a day or two going back with the students and adding adjectives, adding adverbs, adding figurative language, adding sounds, using a thesaurus to change out those blah words, and finding better words to use than said. And so I usually have a checklist that I give the students. And on that checklist, it might say something like, add 1 to 2 adjectives, add an adverb, add a simile, add 3 sounds, or whatever. So you're forcing your students to revise. You're forcing them to go back and find ways to make it better. And it always does. It makes it fantastic. Thank you for joining me today. I hope that you learned some new tips and tricks that you can take back to the classroom and use with your students. And don't forget, if you saw any materials today in our video that you would like, such as that graphic organizer or any of the 5-paragraph or narrative essays, head on over to my Teacher Pay Teachers store and check it out. I got a lot of free stuff there too. So I hope you all have a great day and happy writing.